D&D is getting a new edition. 5th edition was released in the second half of 2014 when I looked like this. It became wildly popular for many key reasons. Stranger Things, Critical Role, nerd culture becoming more accepted thanks to properties like Marvel. And of course, the massive success of Skyrim. The culture of the 2010s was primed to play in a fantasy world with your friends, and 5th edition had you covered. There have been a few other massively popular editions of D&D, the original of course, 3.5, but there is an edition of D&D that most of us can point to as the most disappointing for fans. Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. D&D 4e is widely regarded as subpar, favoring a more MMORPG style of class distinction and game-forward mechanics that many fans felt drew away from the role-playing aspects of the game. What happened to D&D 4th edition? Why did so many fans reject it outright? And what, if anything, will studying its collapse tell us about the future of Dungeons & Dragons? Howdy folks, my name is Sean and welcome back to Delver. To fully understand 4th edition, we need to understand its predecessor, 3rd edition. At the end of the 90s, TSR, the company that made D&D, was nearly bankrupt. The thing is, people were still playing Dungeons & Dragons, it's just that most of them remained in the previous edition. They had thought, well yeah, they released a new game, but why would I spend all this money to get the updated rules when I already have the rules that I'm comfortable with and all of the supplies that I bought for that earlier edition? Plus, at the time, TSR had devoted a lot of its time to creating strange setting books, different worlds that, you could still play D&D in just to keep people playing their game even if it wasn't fantasy anymore. This is where we get a lot of the oddities in D&D's catalog. Thankfully, Wizards of the Coast came to the rescue in 1997 and acquired TSR and Five Rings Publishing Group for $25 million. For 3 years after that, the next edition of D&D was developed, set to be released in 2000. What made this one special? Well, it incorporated an entirely new rolling mechanic called the D20 system, developed by Wizards of the Coast. This new revolution around rolling a D20 and then using that to decide the outcome was more digestible and more flexible for new players and veterans alike. In 2003, a revision to the original 3rd edition came out in the form of 3.5. This new edition, or this new update, was primarily concerned with updating a plethora of small rule changes and expanding the core rulebooks. Shortly after release, fans began to speculate that a new edition was on the horizon, some even claiming that it had already been completed. Ed Stark, a design manager for D&D, said this: "Whether we're halfway to a new edition, I couldn't say. I will say that I would have a hard time backing any upgrade beyond this that wasn't a new edition." However, according to Bill Slavicsek, official production on 4th edition began in May 2005. This new edition was going to focus on amending some of the flaws of 3rd edition, as well as introduce a suite of digital resources for DMs and players alike to use called D&D Insider. The web domain for dndinsider.com was registered on December 15th, 2006. Rob Hennessy was selected as the design lead. Andy Collins and James Wyatt were also selected for the project, and a host of new ideas and core design features were put under the moniker Orcus. Some of these core design principles included faster gameplay, easier encounter creation, a new level 30 maximum, less confusing monster creation rules, and intuitive game design. Another core principle was the introduction of a more modern gamer aesthetic to mimic some of the more popular MMORPG games on the market. Collins believed that this new generation of gamers had very short attention spans, and because of that, they began to take a lot of influence from other popular video games like World of Warcraft. Two teams were formed shortly after, codenamed Flywheel and Scramjet. Flywheel was focused on creating the mechanics of the game, while Scramjet was focused on creating the lore and the setting of the game. The rulebooks were finished in May of 2007 and play-tested in June of that same year. Funnily enough, the Star Wars Saga edition was developed around that same time with a lot of the same people from the D&D 4e project, which is why you see so many similarities between these two books. 4th edition was then officially announced in August of 2007 at Gen Con, the gaming convention that was created by Gary Gygax before D&D was even a thought in his or Dave Arneson's mind. This announcement seemed to coincide with the predictions of Monte Cook, a former employee of Wizards of the Coast and the credited writer of the Dungeon Master's Guide for 3rd edition. He had speculated that D&D 4e was going to be released in 2008, and he was right on the money. He was also concerned about the open game license, the OGL, not continuing into 4th edition. Thank goodness that never came up. Many fans were skeptical about the upcoming 4th edition, but many of their concerns were assuaged when Monte Cook and Gary Gygax came out in vocal support of the new edition. With hype sufficiently raised and everybody ready, it was time for 4th edition to be released to the masses. The first 2 books were released in December of 2007 and January of 2008. These books were Wizards Presents Races and Classes and Wizards Presents Worlds and Monsters. We also received a new adventure in May of 2008, H1 Keep on the Shadowfell. This new adventure acclimated players to the new rules of 4th edition while also providing some pre-made character sheets so new players could get into it too. The Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual were then all released in June of 2008. The digital suite that was announced and promised for 4th edition never saw full implementation. However, we did have different parts of it, including a limited D&D compendium at launch and a D&D character creator in January of 2009. Unfortunately, we never saw the release of D&D Game Table, Dungeon Builder, or Character Visualizer. Apparently, and I completely forgot this, there were over 100 supplementary sourcebooks released during the edition's incredibly short 4-year stint. Despite all this work though, Wizards of the Coast's team decided to shift into creation of D&D 5th edition, codenamed D&D Next, around 2013. One interesting thing to come out of 4th edition was D&D Encounters, which I see as kind of like the predecessor to the Adventurers League. I've been told by many people that Adventurers League has been around before D&D 4th edition, but I could only find resources online that credit it back to D&D Encounters. Encounters was a program where you, as a busy person, could go to your local game store, sit down and play D&D with an established game master and table, and then you don't have to come to the next session. It's a low commitment way to get back into the game for people who had already been into it, or people who are just busy and want to play some D&D but don't have time for a weekly game. And personally, as somebody who got kind of their big start into D&D through Adventurers League, this was a wild thing to realize that it started just the edition before. Unfortunately, D&D 4th edition was not meant to last. It was the shortest edition of D&D ever, only spanning from 2008 to 2012, a short 4 years. Well, why was that? Before I begin on any speculation, I need to make it clear that I have never played 4th edition. I was introduced to D&D in 2015, shortly after 5th edition came out, and I have yet to play any of the older editions. So I'm going to go off the speculation and testimony of people who did play it, rather than kind of synthesizing it myself. But if you have any first-hand testimony, if you played 4th edition, drop it down in the comments. Let me know how your experience was it, and if your experience matches up with anything I say. I think it's important when looking at a product like this in a community this large to get multiple perspectives as to why it just didn't work out. First, there was a lot of conflict about leaving the table in favor of online play in the early days of 4th edition. However, this doesn't seem to be that big of an issue in 2024. According to a poll I did on my channel recently, out of 528 responses, 38% of you claim to be playing D&D online. An additional 22% claim to be doing online and in person, meaning a combined total of 60% of you are doing D&D online in some capacity. The other thing is my audience skews a little older, so that's actually pretty crazy that a lot of older audiences are still playing 60% online. A major reason for the criticism of online play stemmed from a lot of groups losing players to the game World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft was a massive hit in the early 2000s, and because a lot of people who liked fantasy had gone into it and were spending a lot of time in it, it was really weird when 4th edition began to mimic some of the abilities, and at the same time pushing to go online with your play. It just left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths who had lost their tables to World of Warcraft. The wargaming aspect of 4th edition made it more dependent on things like party building and team composition. Many people feeling that the powers system incorporated in 4th edition acted too similar to World of Warcraft or other MMORPG games with their hotbar abilities. People also felt restricted into the archetypes of their classes. You're a tank, you're a DPS, or you're support, just like raids in World of Warcraft. According to Graeme Barber from POCGamer, some of the major problems with 4th edition were forcing classes to fit certain roles, a majority of combat-focused abilities, ham-fisted lore additions to create a single mono setting, less opportunity for multiclassing, way too many books and supplements for the full experience, a lack of diversity for a product that was looking to go into a larger market and audience, and no compatibility for the former edition. This is probably why we see so many specific design choices made with the upcoming revisions to D&D 5th edition. Tons of class flexibility, condensing the information into a single core rule set, more diversity and inclusivity, and a fully compatible set of rules with any of the former books in 5th edition. If you want any more specifics on that information, I highly recommend going to Barber's article and reading it for yourself. And of course, all of the sources you've seen referenced throughout the video will be down in the description below. 4th edition had its issues, but a lot of what it did actually stuck with and carried over into 5th edition. Magic items became less important to making your character, because you would actually get cool abilities each level as you went up in progression. Now don't get me wrong, this existed in previous editions, but it became way more diverse during 4th edition's run. We also got features which helped to distinguish your character from their class a little bit more. And of course, the formatting in 4th edition, because reading 3E is like sandpaper over latex. Now, there was a lot to love and carry over from 4th edition, but Barber says it best when talking about the legacy of the system. Ultimately, the edition failed because while it was labeled Dungeons & Dragons, it didn't feel, act, or read like Dungeons & Dragons. Now, we all know what happened next. 5th edition released in 2014, and it caught like wildfire. We now have a highly produced movie, famous players and dungeon masters, a TV show inspired by a game of D&D, as well as a lot of really awesome memories with our friends. As Wizards of the Coast prepares to release their next dive into the IP, I think it's important for us to look back at 4th edition with both admiration and caution, the same way Wizards of the Coast is likely doing. One D&D, or D&D 5th edition 2024 or 5.5, whatever they're calling it, is not going to fix every problem. It will have some good, it's also going to have some bad. And it's up to us to decide which side is more impactful in the long run. And if it doesn't work out, we always have 5th edition to go back to. Or maybe we could give 4th edition one more chance. Thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you guys next time.